The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for joining me this week. We are finally diving into a topic that I've been wanting to cover for a very long time, and I'm not going to spend a long time on this intro. I really want to get right to it. I have invited Meg Appelgate onto my show. She is a survivor of what we refer to, or what is generally referred to as the troubled teen industry. TTI. And we have actually covered this in some detail years ago on this show, or on my podcast, my Sensibly Speaking podcast, when I have had teen survivors from Scientology speak about their experiences in New Mexico, in Mojave, out in the desert, under the guidance and care, quote unquote, of Scientologists who were unlicensed, unregulated, not therapists, had no idea what they were doing, running these boot camp operations to deal with kids whose parents have given up on them. And this is in the Scientology context. We talked with Nathan, we talked with others who grew up in those situations. And that was actually representative of not only abuses on the part of Scientology and the Church of Scientology, but a more general situation that exists all over the world and very much in the United States. This loosely affiliated network of organizations, churches, religious outfits, non-religious outfits that purport to help teens through troubled times and sell their parents on this bill of goods about how they're going to care for them, help them, therapize them, give them assistance, and instead do everything exactly the opposite of that. So, Meg, welcome to my show. Thank you very much for being on here today. You not only are a survivor, but you have started your own organization, Unsilenced, and you advocate against this sort of thing. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Yes. We work very hard to try to stop institutional child abuse and then also try to interrupt the pipeline that exists between communities and these programs as well.
Excellent. Well, let's get to it. I've done enough talking. Why don't you tell us, what is this stuff? What did you grow up in or have to deal with as a child? And then we can go more broad into what this whole thing kind of is. As I mentioned, a loosely affiliated network of right. Organizations is not much of a description, so we can get into some details on that.
You did a pretty good job, actually. Most people ask me to define it, but you did actually a really good job of kind of giving an idea of what this industry looks like and what it is. Yeah, so I'm Meg Appelgate. I am the founder and CEO of Unsilenced, and the reason why I care so much about this topic is because when I was 15, I woke up in the middle of the night. These two strangers told me that I'm coming with them and that we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And I'm sure many of you have heard this story before because they say the same thing to almost every single youth. And so, they made me undress in front of them. They made me go to the bathroom in front of them. And then they threw me into the back of an SUV. Drove off to the airport, and they got me onto a plane to one of my first programs. The first program was in Idaho. I spent 6 months there in complete lockdown. And then after that, I went to northern Montana, where I spent the next 3 years. So from the ages of 15 to 18 and a half, I was completely isolated and had to spend that being abused in 2 different facilities.
My goodness. All right. Now let's establish first off, to remove any question marks or mystery on this. Yeah. What was it that caused your parents to reach out, contact this organization, bring these strangers into your home, and basically, kidnap you, legally kidnap you, I guess right. You could say?
Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing, because if you know my parents and you were to say, hey, I think you should put your kid in our program and we think you should kidnap her to get her there. They'd be like, what? Like, we shouldn't trust this program. And that's why the educational consultants exist. And that's what they did. They hired an educational consultant, which oftentimes costs $10,000, $15,000, and they claim to be experts in alternative placements. But in reality, many times they don't have any kind of educational background, and they're just a pipeline into this industry. And many times they're actually referring kids to these programs and potentially getting kickbacks and have never even been there to be able to say, oh, it's actually a good program. So that's kind of what happened. And that's what helps parents get used to that idea slowly of doing these things that kind of go against their morals, is they were told by the educational consultant, this is the place you should go. And that place says, well, you know what? From what I hear about your daughter, she's a run risk. We suggest you use this escort company, and you should do it in the middle of the night so that she can't run away, because if she runs away, she'll die. And as a parent, if you hear that, what parent isn't going to be like, oh, no, 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 I'm not going to listen to these quote professionals. I'm going to make my own decision. If they're making the decision to even entertain this idea, they're obviously at the end of their rope. They're obviously already scared, and they take advantage of that. They use fear mongering and deceptive marketing to get parents to feel like, oh, we've got these other people on our team now. Now we've got a support team for my kid. And it starts to make them feel comfortable, and they start to trust them. And that's why those kinds of things happen.
Right. Well, what prompts parents, and your parents specifically, to reach out for this in the first place? What was so horrible about the behavior? What
Oh, I was
what
just
were
so
you up
bad.
to? And I mean, because okay, well, like, for example, right? I mean, we're both coming at this with a lot of knowledge about what's
Right.
going on and how unjust this is. There are people out there who believe that children can be unruly, undisciplined, and out of control to such a degree that they need to be institutionalized, locked up, dealt with in this way, have their agency taken away from them. So I guess what I'm wondering is, what is it that is happening that these parents become this desperate?
Right. I think, well, in my case, I was undiagnosed autistic at that point back then. I had ADHD, so I'm obviously dealing with, struggling with grades and things like that. But the undiagnosed autism really was what did it, because I really wanted to fit in, and I just wanted friends. And so the lengths that I went to get friends was like skipping school and trying to smoke weed, and started to drink. I started to have sex, and I get it. I've got a teenager. It is scary when kids all of a sudden seems like they have like a new personality, and they start pushing back against authority and saying, screw you guys, and doing what they want and sneaking out of the house. Like, that's scary. I get it. But what happens is that they take that fear, right? And they make them think that there's no other option but to actually do this. Now, there are times when kids are being sent away for even more scary reasons, like maybe self-harm, or potentially like, suicidal ideations or things like that, right? That even gets into more scary territory and more pressure based, right? So parents are like, if I don't do something, they actually are going to hurt themselves, right? So it's a huge wide range of reasons why kids get sent to this industry. But the fact of the matter is that they claim to be able to be treating this entire impossibly long list of things. And in reality, it's one size fits all for everything, whether you're being sent because you have autism or ADHD, all the way to self-harm, or potentially trauma from like a sexual assault or something like that. They treat it all the same. So in reality, there is no difference.
Exactly. And the problem, of course, with one size fits all is, shoplifting and early onset autism are radically different things.
Right.
Like, duh. I mean, yes, exactly. I mean, we shouldn't have to say these things out loud, but these days it feels like maybe we need to. So,
Exactly.
so we will do that. And so now, in terms of the front end of this and what parents are seeing and why they might, give over to this, and believe me, by the time we're done with this, you're going to get why we're like so outraged about this. There's a lot going on in these groups to these kids that is completely not okay. but I was really myself still trying to get my head around why parents would do this. And so, and apparently it's a lot of PR, a lot of propaganda, a lot of straight up lies,
Oh yeah.
selling the parents on why this is necessary. They escalate the fear, the terror even of, oh my God, my kid's bad, but he's going to get so much worse.
Yeah, exactly.
That all makes sense. I'm wondering when they go to websites or get literature or talk to people about this, are there credentials? Are there certifications of some kind? Does it appear that this is a licensed activity? How does that come across?
This is where people don't have the information, right? Because if you go to these websites, not only do they have great big pictures of horses and dogs, and you get to do whatever you want with them, and we have EMDR and all these trauma-informed words and buzzwords on their website. And so they see that and they're like, wow, these people are actually doing this stuff. They don't realize that because of current regulations and oversight, they can put that stuff and not do it. So there's nothing making them do what they're saying that they're going to do, right?
Okay.
Have that. Then we have the fact that, yeah, in most states, you'll have to have some kind of like insurance or license, right? In that state, depending, unless you have an exemption with, religious exemption, whatever. But so let's just take the normal program in Utah, right? So this program has a license, and on the website they'll say like JCO certified and yada yada. NatSap, it'll have a big NatSap program emblem, and it'll say we are licensed by, and use all these words. It's not a licensing company, but there's nothing that's going to happen because of that. Like NatSap's a trade organization that you just become a part of, and you get to use their logo. But so there's just nothing making them tell the truth. And that's part of the issue, because they're doing it really, really well, especially in the last 15 years. We used to see the WASP programs that were like kids in cages and, lots of stuff going on. They didn't really try too hard on their websites. Granted, websites weren't that advanced back then, but now it's all pretty. They knew they had to change their look because of all the lawsuits and all of the public recognition of the harm that are in these facilities. And so now it's very, 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 very difficult to see transparently what is actually going on in these programs. So
Right.
it makes it even harder for the parents. And then you add on the fact that I have in real time seen survivors submit a Google review that's negative and seen it get taken down immediately. And so only the good Google reviews are showing. So there's so many different layers and elements that prevent the decision makers and communities to getting the actual information of things happening in this industry. And that's without even mentioning the fact there's no oversight agency giving us information. So a parent would have to do record requests to be able to get DHS information or abuse allegations. And it's a mess.
It truly is. Thank you for saying all of that, because that's completely consistent with everything I've found diving down this rabbit hole of the legislation and the oversight and the regulatory bodies who are supposed to be or have some part in overseeing some aspect of this. Because this is a really interesting thing in that there isn't some government agency that is overall responsible for child welfare or
there's no federal agency at all. Yeah, I mean, it's
nothing.
It's the states. Yep.
Nothing, right? At best, we have Department of Health and Human Services, which is currently headed up by somebody who I'm just going to say is insane. So that kind of doesn't really get us anywhere these days, but we'll get to that. First, let's get back to your story. I'm sorry. I don't want to jump the gun on all of this. There's so much to say.
Important stuff,
It really is. And we'll get to the regulation part of this and where things are falling down. But first, let's define the problem. Now that we've got this, okay, so parents are being lied to about salvation or issues of rehabilitation or therapy or let's fix your kid.
I'm going to go even further, though, because it's not even just parents. We are talking about 23 billion in public funds from school districts, foster care kids, juvenile justice. It's being funneled into this industry. So it's not even just parents making this decision. We're talking about judges and mental health professionals, you name it. There is a gigantic misconception that these programs are helpful, and we're using school district dollars to send these kids to these facilities. So it goes even further than parents' decisions.
Oh my God. So I knew public funds were being, shifted in this direction, but I did not realize when you start throwing around numbers like 23 billion with a B,
Yes.
my head starts exploding. I mean, we're talking about, unthinkable amounts of money being dispersed around not a lot of groups. I mean, we're not talking about a huge, huge network here. But we'll get to that. So let's pull it back again. You wake up in the middle of the night, 15 years old. You have been committing the crimes of pretty much what every
Every
teenage
teenager
kid
does.
does in one degree or another.
Yep.
It's shocking to me, just as a comment, how what's the word? When you amnesia, how amnesiac parents become about themselves as teenagers when they have teenagers. Because if you're gonna have a kid, get ready for it, because that kid is gonna suddenly hate you and everything you
Oh, yeah.
stand for. It's the
Yeah.
weirdest thing, but we all went through
It's
it,
very
right?
weird. It's very weird. I have
It's
two
bizarre.
teenagers. It's
Yeah,
just
right? Isn't it totally crazy?
totally. Yeah.
Because they're totally fine, and then suddenly they're just not,
Right.
and you're like, what, who is this person in my house? I thought I knew this person.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it can be quite disconcerting for people, and it doesn't surprise me at all that, especially in the well-ordered, structured evangelical world, where they really put the controls on kids, it doesn't surprise me at all that a lot of parents from that world would fall prey to, oh, this is what my kid needs. He just doesn't have enough Jesus and discipline in his life, and here we
Right.
go. Um, okay, so your story picks up from there. Where were you? Where was it you were taken? Who was running that outfit? And what you said, 6 months in one place and then 3 years somewhere
Yeah.
else? What? Tell me more about those and what your daily
So
was
the
like.
first place was, actually don't know if it's licensed as a psychiatric facility or a residential treatment center, but it was a lockdown, magnetic lock doors. You can't go in and out. You're stuck, right? And it was very hospital-y feely. I don't know how else to explain it. Cameras everywhere, motion sensors in the middle of the room, so one patient can't cross the room to the other without an alarm going off because you could hurt someone. You can't have pencils. You can't have any toiletries in your room because you could self-harm with the minute amount of alcohol that's in, anything like toothpaste or something. So it was very, very, very high control. And I like to break it down into the first 6 months of Intermountain Hospital is who it was owned by, which I believe at the time was CRC Health, and CRC Health was since bought out. But that's the whole private equity side of things But so CRC Health owned Intermountain Hospital. And that first 6 months, I like to think about it as just ultimate control. They tried to jam it into me that I have no control over my life, and me trying to control everything around me is what's wrong with me. So it was all about breaking me down to make sure I am not as strong-willed. They had a problem with the fact that I was a very strong personality. And so one of the most traumatic things I think that I went through there looking back is they put me on something called desk space and random draw. And so I'd get up in the morning, I'd sit at a desk all day long writing 2-page essays on each of the thinking errors. There's 36, by the way, so it's a lot. And I would have this
Thinking
bag.
errors.
Thinking errors. Yeah. So there's a 36 thinking errors that you have to write 2 pages on. So cognitive distortions, right? And how it applies to your
Okay,
life, right?
sure.
So
This is their version
order,
of psychoeducation.
right, exactly. That's my education, the whole thing. So then in order to be with my peers or to go to therapy or go program, as we call it, so go to the, art therapy or go outside or go to the cafeteria, I'd have to choose from this plastic bag, and it had 10 pieces of paper in it. There was 9 no's and 1 yes. And every time they would go to group, I would pick out of the bag. If it was yes, I could go. If it was no, I couldn't. But with 9 no's and 1 yes, I rarely got to go. And it was their idea of stealing all control so I don't try to control things around me. Because I did. I was trying to control everything around me because I was undiagnosed autistic. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to I was learning how to mask, to be honest, to be able to fit in into society. So they just tried to wear me down. And on top of that, my daily environment was seeing kids be restrained, thrown on the ground, multiple, like 6 staff jumping on top of them, pulling their pants down, shooting them up with medications, carrying him to the quiet room that was padded and had like his straps on this bed in the middle of the room and lock him in there. So it was a very chaotic environment. And then you add on top of that the fact that the second day I was there, they diagnosed me with bipolar disorder, which I don't have, and they pumped me full of medications. And so every single day I was like throwing up, I was dizzy, I couldn't stay awake during the day. And so then I'd get punished for not staying awake during the day, and then I'd lose a level because I couldn't stay up. But really, it's because I was on like so much medication that I couldn't stay awake. So it was just like this ultimate control, like just give up. That's what they were trying to get me to do, just give up. And so that's kind of what I learned at the first place. And then I found out I was going to my second, which was called Chrysalis. Chrysalis was actually owned by a couple, Mary and Kenny, and it was a private program. So they started it in their house. So I lived with my therapists and 10 other girls in a big log cabin in the middle of the woods. And we were all a Chrysalis family. And the girls were my Chrysalis sisters. And, you know, just think about that. I was sharing a bathroom with my therapists. I mean, it's extremely inappropriate, right? So
This is
yeah,
beyond.
this is now
There's
getting into the
nothing
real
about
full.
any of
Yeah,
this that is therapy. Let's just
no, no,
cancel that whole
not in my
concept. This
opinion.
is
No.
pseudo-scientific, pseudo-therapeutic, cultic bullshit is what this is.
Mhm.
But we'll get there. Please continue. I'm sorry.
So
I got
no, I mean,
it.
it's maddening. I know.
It really is
Um,
frustrating. Yeah.
so Mary and Kenny own the program now. Since when I left in 2004, I think it was like in 2011, they sold it to Interchange. Interchange became Embark Behavioral Health. Embark Behavioral Health is backed by private equity, and they have programs all over the country. So
Mm.
now Chrysalis is owned by Embark Behavioral Health, but back then it was owned by Mary and Kenny. And I saw during my 3 years them expand. So we started with 10 girls. By the time I left, we had 32 in 2 different houses, 2 campuses. Like they expanded. Chrysalis goes way, just dive right into that cultic atmosphere. They took a page from Synanon's book in something called The Game. And so this was called Circle, but it's modeled after Synanon's The Game. We'd have to sit in a circle and one person would be in the hot seat and we would hear peer confrontations just over and over and over again for hours. And you couldn't respond because it'd be defensive. And then last, Kenny would his voice would pop up and he would say something that was really bad that hurt you the most because you want his attention so badly and want his acceptance, right? And he was the leader, right? So he was the one that everyone wanted to please. His morality was number one and his acceptance was number one. And we all the girls fought for his attention and to be his favorite, and he had favorites. So he made it very clear. And so it was a very, very destructive and toxic place to live. And for those that don't follow the program, as we say, they used forced labor. We completely maintained that property. We chopped the wood in -10 in the winter, right? We took care of all the horses and the dogs and all the animals. We mowed the lawn. We did the gardening. We cooked all the food. We did all the cleaning. We washed all the cars. We did everything. And so just to put it into perspective, we were also trying to get school done. So having time for like your homeschool or whatnot, like it was very hard to fit everything in because chores were put before everything else. And they had a level system like most of these programs. And it took me 9 months to get to level 2, which is ridiculous because I'm a hard kid, right? I was the abrasive one and intrusive, and I heard all these horrible things, right? And so that program really focused hard on kind of doubling down on what the first one did. Like they already taught me how to not have control. Well, this just went to a new degree, right? They broke you down even further. And anytime you had any kind of confidence, like let's say one of the girls was doing really well, you could tell the people would pay attention to it and be sure to like confront them in the next circle. And it was furthermore really destructive because these are my peers, these are my sisters, like this is my family. Remember, this is them telling me that we are a family, we are only the only thing that matters right now. And my family is saying I'm horrible, and they're saying I'm never going to be loved and accepted in society, and I'm all these horrible things. And so it was so destructive to hear that from your peers and then to be the one encouraged to say that to your peers, which is going against everything that I am. I'm not a mean person. I don't want to say these, I don't want to hurt people's feelings. And so it was further destructive because it forced me and others to say things we didn't want to, but we had to in order to be accepted by the leader. So it is, in my opinion, it really goes headfirst into the cult, and which the first program really didn't have. It was more just like highly institutionalized abuse. And we really get into the indoctrination part of things when we get into Chrysalis.
Right, right. Well, the fact that you had this charismatic leader, you know, with this couple leading the
Yes.
group, and
Mhm.
the codependent dynamic you describe is totally
Excellent.
culty, and
Yeah.
and you're right. It's a differentiation between that and this institutionalized systematic
Mhm.
abuse, which is different. It's a little bit different from, you know, from the cult dynamic. But I'm really glad that you brought up Synanon. Because encounter groups, as you might, if you're listening, you may have heard this term over the years. This is a Synanon thing. This concept of confrontational, aggressive, hostile, calling out your, you know, your bullshit and calling you out on it on a regular and living in communally. This all started in the 60s, and this was drug rehab turned into, you know, a cult,
Mhm.
which fell apart, and who's, you know, the leader, Duke, died many years ago. Thankfully, he was a horrible, horrible human being, and the whole Synanon thing was a great case study in good intentions gone to the worst possible places.
Right.
Um, right?
And
I
then
mean,
they
really
had
bad
the true
stuff.
believers in Synanon then went on to go form their own abusive spin-off programs like
That's right.
CDU and Straight Incorporated and Kids. And, you know, even if you look at CDU, which was, you know, it's long gone now, but they called the game, right, was running your anger, right?
Yeah.
And so they took the same model, and even though it was shut down because of how abusive Synanon was, they just don't notice when all of a sudden they start doing it in all of these youth facilities. It's just
Well,
mind-boggling.
it is mind-boggling, and this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I think we've established pretty well at this point with what you've said, you know, the kind of environment you were in. Let me ask a couple clarifying questions just
Yeah.
to make sure we all understand what it was like for you and for the others there. First 10, now then 32 by the time you're out of there, and who knows, you know, where it went to. Um, Physical abuse?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would say physical abuse. That's hard for me. It's even hard for me to admit that. But like, because I you have the indoctrination of like you don't want you know, but there's times when he would come up behind me, Kenny, and he would grab the back of your neck and he would squeeze so hard and it would hurt, but it also felt good because it meant I was on his good side that day. So like I consider that physical abuse
Yeah.
in my head. Yeah. So definitely physical.
Absolutely. Not, you know, not to mention earlier you mentioned being thrown down, you know, at that
Oh,
earlier
and
place.
yeah.
Was
And he
there
would
thing
wrestle
did
us too. So
that was what I was wondering, did that kind of thing happen there as
yeah.
well?
Yeah.
Was there would you were there Lord of the Flies kinds of things going on? In other words, you know, the peer pressure you mentioned, you know, this being forced to confront others, tell them how horrible, you know, their behaviors are, or they are, or whatever. This gets kind of Lord of the Flies ish, right? This sort of communal, let's all tear each other apart kind of thing, and this is all done in the name of building you up, which
Yeah,
is the
most
really
definitely.
twisted, corrupt part of this. How much of that was, I mean, from what you described, it seems like that was the almost the entirety of the program was
Yeah,
let's
it
get
was.
everybody really
They were
tearing into each other.
100% about personal accountability. And like, I don't think I've ever heard the word confrontation more than in those 3 years. It is. So to put it in perspective, these are the years you're learning how to relate to other people. Like, what does a relationship look like with a friend, with a lover, with your family, your siblings, whatever. I left that program thinking that you're not a good friend unless you confront people. There wasn't any kind of like disclaimer saying, hey, we're going to teach you this, method of confrontation, but it's not something we want you to do with everyone. There's going to be a time and a place, but we do want for you to learn how to. No, it's like you're not being a good friend unless you confront people. And so I went to college like confronting friends and losing friends because I had no idea this wasn't like okay to do in the world. So
exactly.
definitely, yeah,
not exactly setting you up for success.
no.
Now, in terms of disciplines and punishments, social ostracization, being
Oh,
called out is one level. What was the ladder of discipline here? How bad could it get? And was there a point where they would? I can't imagine the ultimate discipline in a place like this is getting kicked out, because
yeah.
that's how
You
anybody
get
would want to
kicked
do is
You
get
get
kicked
kicked
out,
out.
right?
You get kicked out for sure. This was one of the most harmful things, and it made it easier for me to consider it a cult because Kenny would have his favorites, as I said. And let's say this one girl has been with me for 2 years. She's my chrysalis sister. She's Kenny's favorite. And all of a sudden she runs away. That is something you do not do in chrysalis. And Kenny's going to flip out. So this person that was highly regarded by Kenny, and then all of a sudden we wake up and find out that this girl ran away. We know she's no longer accepted into chrysalis. And so Kenny will come in and call her a slut and call her a horrible person. And all of a sudden this person who's we love and we accept, we're being told all these horrible things, and that she is no longer on the approved list, so we can't contact her, and we were duped, we were conned, or he used all these phrases to really encourage judgment and encourage like that judgmental thought process of judging everyone's behaviors around you. And it made it very toxic because you never knew if someone was there to stay, because he would be all for someone and then they would do something like run away, because that was his one thing. If he used to say, there aren't any bolts and chains on these doors. Chrysalis girls are expected to stay in their bed. So if you ran away, you were out, and you didn't want your family to hear bad things about you. So it made you not make that decision. There was a lot of that, a lot of that
Okay.
pressure on you. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I get it on that. I think we would probably need to emphasize at this point that, when you're in a situation like that, you're not thinking about it, looking at it, seeing it at all the way we are talking about it right now. Because, external to it is a very different place from when you're in it, So I guess I can imagine a situation where running away or being kicked out,
I
well,
think I was going to say,
yeah.
Yonda Lalich is, I've become friends with her in the past
Oh,
several
yeah.
years. And she says it best, is that when you're in that kind of environment, my morality is the immorality of the leader. So in order to be doing what I know is right, like I'm sure if I thought about it back then, like it was abuse and it didn't feel good, but it stopped it from going into I'm being abused, because that would hurt Kenny. If I left, that would hurt Kenny. And I respected him so much. And that's that like bounded choice, right?
That's it.
It's like people ask, like, why didn't you just leave? Like there weren't locked doors. You don't understand because that wasn't an option. It wasn't an option to leave. It was,
That's
but
right.
it never occurred to me because I didn't think that that was going on. And it was unheard of. It would be like, why didn't you stab your brother? Like that's what it feels like to hear that. It's like, because I would never. you know?
Exactly. Exactly. Hey, having been in Scientology, I get it, and yeah, it's exactly like that. It just doesn't occur to you.
Right.
Um, and when we talk about bounded choice, it's funny because here's a little viewpoint, an invitation to consider something from this point of view for my audience. Bounded choice isn't just about, okay, I really, really, really want a Three Musketeers, but I can't have it. Right? It's like, no, you have to have the mounds. You have to have the mounds. You have to have the mounds. No Three Musketeers for you, right? It's not really like that. It's more like the Mounds is so good. Why would you want anything else? And after about a month, you stop thinking about anything else but the Mounds candy bar. You know what I mean?
And then every day you see a commercial for Mounds
Exactly.
constantly in the room you're in.
Exactly. Telling you how great it is, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
everybody around you praises the Mounds candy bar all day long because that's all we're allowed to say, right?
Yep.
And so after a while, the choice of Three Musketeers, Payday, whatchamacallit, those just don't
They don't
occur
exist.
to you anymore.
Yep.
That's what it is to be in these situations, So I've never really clarified that exact point before. So I thought
Yeah,
thought it
exactly.
might be worth talking about. Now, I have to ask, because I do want to get a full picture of this, not necessarily just with you, but in the situation you were in at Chrysalis, was there sexual abuse?
Not that I went through.
Okay.
But yet again, now I would consider a grown man who's my therapist, like me sitting on his lap, to be sexual abuse. So,
Yep.
I consider also wrestling with a young girl when you're a therapist, even if you're not a therapist. I think that's odd, and he did that with me. So I do consider there to be some heavily blurred lines with the therapeutic relationship, and it did feel inappropriate in that way, but I have now I will say that there's a current lawsuit right now against Chrysalis in the past couple years for a staff member that allegedly did sexually abuse a girl that was there, and that's what the lawsuit lays out. But I never witnessed any of it happening. I do know many girls that had sex while they were there with people in the community, but I don't know of any, while I was there, any staff or anything like that. Another thing was that we were all girls and you weren't allowed to be gay like that. It's not okay. So if you arrived and they knew that you were gay, you were told that you were not allowed to tell that to the other girls because it makes them feel uncomfortable, is what they said. Because obviously every girl that loves girls will love every girl, right? But
Right.
it's ridiculous.
Clearly.
But so
Yeah.
one thing that I did know that was going on at that time, like there were girls that were hooking up at times. And there was sexual relationships going there, which I think is inappropriate because it's supposed to be being watched, right? As a parent, I don't want that happening. Who knows if it was consensual? I don't know. So like obviously they weren't watching well enough. And even back then they didn't have staff watching us overnight. Like right now you have to have like bed counts and stuff like that. But back in 2001, no. So
Interesting.
yeah, so I don't know the extent of it, but I do know that it's happened. It's just never happened to a high degree to me there.
Okay. In terms of your own personal situation
Right.
there,
Just the blurred line part.
it's a situation that, it would almost be beyond belief to imagine that, in these kinds of generalized control situations, we see sexual abuse rear its ugly head over and
All the
over and
time.
over again.
I see it in so many programs.
But there are always exceptions, I mean, even amongst cults, some cults are very, very over the top when it comes to sex and sexual abuse. Others, Scientology, for example, it's not dogmatic, and in fact, if anything, it's more in the opposite direction. So, but again, even there, you can find plenty of instances where people go wackadoodle on their own and do horrible things. Um, Going bigger than this in this situation you were in. Oh, well, actually, hold on one second. Let me ask you one more thing about the chrysalis thing. I wonder if people in the audience or people who look into this start wondering to themselves, I have, is there some perfect person who could just sort of get through this or navigate this without being abused, right? Because it seems a lot of people might come at this with, well, if they weren't so willful, if they weren't so, stuck up, arrogant, egotistical, conceited teenagers, then maybe they could just settle down and get through this and it wouldn't be such an abusive, horrible thing, right? And that adults wouldn't have to do these things. And that, obviously put the burden on the child in this case, but people do that. is there some situation from your experience with this, both personally and from having educated yourself on this, where somebody could just come through and theoretically sail through this? I don't think that's possible. I think these people would not allow that. But what do you think? What's your take?
Well, if you mean sail through it by not feeling like they were abused, I see it all the time. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
I can certainly, from my point of view, understand that my experience and me feeling abused could coexist with another person who went through the exact same thing and didn't feel abused. And I think that on the flip side, though, people that don't feel like they were abused cannot hold space for the fact that I felt like I was abused. So they
Oh,
can't.
well, there is that.
Yeah,
There is
right.
that.
So
I think what I meant, I think what I was asking though is maybe a bit of a different flow. Perfectly valid question, but I think what I was asking is there somebody who's going to come into something like this and not have to be disciplined,
oh,
not have to go through all that stuff,
yeah, I
just
see it
sail
all.
right through it, give
Oh,
you
yeah.
all the right answers right from the get-go,
I
you
see that. I
know?
mean, I saw that for sure. There are
Yeah?
people I talk to from even Chrysalis that have said now everyone goes to circle, right? And I'm sure during their entire time they had circles about them, right? So, I mean, I can't say that they experienced none of abuse, right? Because everyone went to circle and I think that's abusive, but there are people that seem to have it really easy from my perspective. And when I've talked to them later as adults, they're just like, yeah, I just did everything that I said I was going to do. And they mostly catch on to that and they'll say you're not working the program or something. And then from my understanding, they just kind of like go deeper a little bit in a little way, but they keep a guard up. I was not able to keep the guard up, but certainly there have been people that even knew it was abusive, but didn't get any of it because they were able to just like pretend. And
Wow.
I just can't do that. So
No, and I know most people. I'm pretty sure most people can't. Again, especially when you look at the target demographic of who is being gone after here, right? Which is, teens, generally not worldly people, generally not well experienced people, and generally people who haven't yet had enough hard knocks to be able to navigate a truly abusive situation well. And yet, I'm really glad to hear some could. So that's
I
kind
think it
of good to
also
know.
goes
I didn't expect that.
further too, because there are people that, did have a good experience or whatever that have told me that their home life was horrific, like so much worse. And so I think
Oh,
that. So if you
sure.
like, I didn't have a bad home life at all. Like I love my family. I had a great home life. So I was homesick, but there are some people that go to these programs and they're like, oh, thank God. I'm safe. So if you're in that kind of situation, it makes you more likely that you're gonna feel like, hey, it's better than the alternative, and I can understand that too.
Wow, that makes sense. That makes sense. I hadn't considered, coming from an even more abusive household. It's hard for me to imagine such a thing because I have very strong views about, adults who treat kids like, they're in boot camp and this kind of thing, right? I have I
Same.
just don't think that's the way to approach the problem. But yet, I have to acknowledge that discipline, hard work, are not uh, inherently bad.
Right.
It's not inherently wrong to make somebody do some work or show them the value of exchange or show them the value of a relationship with some give and take. But I struggle to say that
Right.
that's what these places are doing.
Right.
So it's a
Exactly.
little bit hard for me to find the silver lining on this. But of course, we're going to have people who are going to come out of this and go, oh no, it helped.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you happen to have any? Are there studies or research on this in terms of percentages? Is there any kind of, or even anecdotally, do we even know like what the rate of, oh no, it was great, I loved it, versus, if I ever think about that hellhole again, what?
Um, I wish that there needs to be more research for sure.
Yeah, I
Uh,
figured.
but we did do a survey to anyone who went or had mental health care at all in their childhood, from childhood to teenager before 18. And we got a really good sample size of like, I think it was like 700 people that
Hmm.
responded, and a good mix of non-institutionalized and institutionalized. So we actually got a good mix. And one of the most, I'll probably say, quote the entire wrong percentage because I'm doing it from memory, but one of the most profound things that I saw from there were the percentage of people that went to wilderness programs and therapeutic boarding schools and found them helpful. Just anecdotally, did it help you? And for therapeutic boarding schools, I think it was 2.9% say that it was helpful. And for wilderness programs, it was, I think, 1.2. So
Wow.
we're talking
Okay.
about a very small percentage
Very tiny.
of
Got
what
it.
we were able to sample that found these programs. I mean, I think one of the labels was residential treatment, like any kind of residential treatment. And I think the highest one was like 5%, 6% or something
My
like
goodness.
crazy low. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's no good. That's no good. Yeah, that's okay. Well, that's something better than nothing in terms of
Right.
data. So I just wanted, yeah, so I wanted to ask about that. All right, so going broader here, looking, at the bigger picture of this, and I've sort of focused my efforts on this on United States. I don't know internationally. I'm sure such things exist internationally, but certainly here in the United States, it's a hidden in plain sight kind of operation. You'll find places that are doing this, but they're out in the woods, or they're out in the fields, or they're out, in the mountains, or something. They're kind of out there. They're you drive right past them on the road. You don't know. There's a side road, and 2 miles down the road, there's 50 kids being held hostage. Like you just wouldn't even know.
Yep.
How many of these places are there,
Oh,
roughly? Do you know? Do you know?
I wish, I get asked that all the time, and it's
Yeah.
impossible to keep track of because they'll shut down and we'll be like, hey, we got them. And then like 6 weeks later, they'll rebrand and have a new LLC and pop up and we won't even know because they have a new, and they go to great lengths, let me tell you, to make sure that we don't find out that we know it's the same program. So much so, this is the crazy one. Diamond Ranch Academy shut down last year, and it was because of the death of Taylor Goodridge after that. And we helped with that case and everything. So they shut down, and then all of a sudden, we get word of this new academy that popped up. And we're like, it's not the same, though. It's a different address. And so one of my team members goes on Google Earth or Google Maps and zooms in and goes, this looks like the same place, but it's a different address. They own the road. So they changed the name of the road so that no one will know that it's the same place that 3 people died at. So
Oh
it's
my God.
it's just they go through such great lengths. So look, all I know is that on our archive we've got information on over 3,500 different programs. And
3,500.
but those are tons of closed programs, right? But it's
Okay.
whenever we find a new program, we have to figure out who owns it and is it a rebrand? Are they the same staff? Do we consider it closed if it's the exact same building but a new name? We have to make all these decisions. It's impossible to keep up with. And you just it's a whack-a-mole is what we say.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I get that. I totally get that. Because they hide, they're not obvious. And yeah, the Yelp reviews. Um,
I know.
so we have a bit of a few different activities that fall under this umbrella. Um, we mentioned boot camps, or wilderness things versus therapeutic live-in things, and I strain with that word therapeutic right now, but okay, so we have these things that label themselves that way. We have Scientology doing its Mojave Desert Academy. I mean, we have variations on the theme. So there's sort of like these alternate school setups, right? Where we're going to school you, but we're also going to work you, to tire you out and teach you about exchange and all this kind of stuff, and basically acclimate you into society through this very forceful process that might take years.
Yep.
Right. So that's a thing. What else is there that falls under this umbrella of TTI? Oh yeah, the pray the gay away.
Oh yeah, conversion therapy. Yeah.
Conversion therapy. Yeah, that's another thing that happens under this, right?
And so like I struggle with even saying conversion therapy because a lot of the programs don't say that they're doing, like they don't put it out there like, hey, come to our conversion therapy, but
Right.
it happens, right? And a lot of the
Right.
people that run the programs or the therapists there or the staff, they think within those lines. And so it's happening even if they claim it's not happening because of the ideals of the people that are watching the kids, right? So it's, but they don't anymore really much like actually market themselves of, hey, come to the conversion, because everyone knows that it's so bad. So, but yeah, conversion therapy is going on in lots of these programs. We've got wilderness programs, wilderness therapy as it's called, boot camps, group homes, therapeutic boarding schools, residential treatment centers. They go by academies a lot. So it'll be like blank academy or blank ranch. We hear ranches a lot, especially within the religious sectors and stuff. We see lots of
Right.
ranches. And yeah, so it doesn't really matter the name. They're all doing the same kind of stuff in different
Okay.
ways, and it's this,
Right.
you know, some of them put lipstick
Right.
on a pig and they'll have like this super nice facility, expensive gym and a football field and you name it. But they're all, in my opinion, doing all the same stuff.
So beyond what we've described as far as the confrontational encounter group activity, you mentioned being in a place for the first 6 months where you are on a lockdown that is actually more draconian than what people on death row have to experience in terms of lockdown. I mean, with the motion sensors and stuff, you're describing a literal 1984 environment.
Yeah.
That's really terrifying to me. That's like crazy levels of captivity.
Right. Exactly.
But yet then you move to another place where it was exact opposite of that in many ways, and the controls became thought policing and thought control. Became and a more of a culty charismatic leader sort of model. So we have different methods being used here just in the two groups you were part of, or had the unfortunate encounter
Forced
with.
into, right?
Yeah, forced into literally. So what are we looking at in terms of when you say it's basically one program or one thing that they're doing? What are they doing? What are they doing, these kids, and what's the end product as far as they're concerned? What do they think they're doing?
I think, they think that they're fixing what's wrong with the kid, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they, in one fell swoop, are taking away behaviors that are labeled as problematic. They are making sure that they listen. I mean, they're trying to make them all cookie cutter, perfect teens, I think. And you know, I have to touch on just a lot of this has to do with the pathologization that happens with adolescents in general and not understanding that a lot of the behaviors that end kids up in these facilities are so normal. Not only normal, but like to be expected in normal development. Like if they're not doing them, you should be worried. So it doesn't mean they're not scary, but they are normal. And so it is what they're doing is they're making teenagerhood more manageable stress wise for parents. And so I think a success story would be one that, it knows their place, I think is kind of what it is. And so what they're doing is behavior modification. No
Right.
way, no matter any way you look at it, it's behavior modification. Anything that's level based like that, where you do good, you get rewards, you do bad, you get consequences. That's behavior
Conditioning.
modification.
It's
Yeah,
absolutely
conditioning.
conditioning.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it's harmful. It's harmful,
Yeah.
Many of the programs put kids in isolation, and whether it's isolation physical and lock you in a room, or if it's like you're on silence and you can't speak to anyone for 3 months. It doesn't, it's the effect is the same. It's isolating. It's really traumatic.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if you're in the wilderness and you're lacking enough food and water and exercising all day long, or you're in a residential treatment center. The effect is the exact same. The trauma is what comes out of this. The youth considering themselves survivors is what the end game is in actuality.
Right. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, you're basically making a bunch of trauma survivors. Um, how young do they go? It's called the
Uh,
troubled teen industry,
I
but how
know
young does this go?
you're getting younger and younger, honestly. You know,
Really?
yeah, there are places that I know of that take they're like children's hospitals that, they say hospital, but we're talking about like residential treatment center, like 3, like, and up. I see.
3?
Yeah, I've been to a place that takes kids that are like, kids that don't have like a foster care kids that are in an institution. I mean, it's not great, but I'd say most of the troubled teen programs, they are getting lower and lower. Like when I was sent, it was unheard of to get a kid that was under 13. And now it's like last year, a 12-year-old died at Trails, Carolina. So
Ugh.
we're talking about easily 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds are being sent to these places. And and I've seen a couple different marketing snapshots of websites saying they're opening their kids program now and like stuff like, so
Oh,
it's just, yeah, it's
oh,
really
that's just very disturbing. Um, okay, okay, fair enough. How percentage wise, from your experience or databases, these things you put together, religious versus non-religious versus secular based?
about percentage of existing.
Yeah.
Oh, I that's hard too because the religious ones are even more hard to track because
Oh, really?
a lot of times it's kind of word of mouth. They don't do a
Mhm.
ton of, they'll go to one, it's not really like an educational consultant. It would be more like their form of that pipeline. So some religious referral sources. And so we won't know those referral sources. So they'll have a lot of kids coming into that program and we don't even know about it. Right. So
Right.
it's really hard with the religious ones to know. I'd say, and they also don't have as many regulations and they exist like in a little pockets of places. And so they're kind of hush hush and it's much more hard to track unless it gets to like the size of what Agape boarding school did, right, in Missouri. And then we know, right, because they're in the media and stuff. But
Okay.
I'd say there's a good amount. I mean, and even the ones that aren't technically religious. There's a bunch in Utah, and most of the people that run them are Mormon. And so you do have the Mormon values and ideals that are even unconsciously being pushed, right?
Oh,
So
sure. Oh,
an
absolutely. Yeah.
undertone of religion a lot of times in these programs. Chrysalis was not a religious program, but we had to go to church every week. So how is it not a religious? So if you think about it in terms like that, yeah.
Right. Utah has come up a few times in my research on this as a state where there's a great deal of this. Utah is also a place where multi-level marketing is more highly concentrated. Utah is a place that is basically run by a state-sponsored cult, and so a lot of one of the funny things about funny, not haha, but funny, weird about culty stuff is like attracts like.
Mhm.
It's very interesting how many people who are already in a culty situation will then hook up on an MLM
Hey,
or send their
I fell for one. So
yeah, hey, my folks did too. We were Amway, for about a year.
right.
Uh, and it's just kind of funny and fads and this kind of thing, right? If you're kind of a mind to, give over to easy, simple answers to complex questions, then you might do that in other parts of your life too. Makes sense.
Right.
But religious versus secular has been a question for me with this. I've had the idea from a lot of what I've read that a great deal of this is religiously backed or inspired or
There's a good
promoted.
amount. Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a good amount. Because you can't know about like even certain churches in like rural areas will have like a couple in that town that's doing something. So it's so hard to track.
Right,
But I will
right.
say this is one thing I am certain about that if a random survivor comes to me and they say I was abused and I say, "What program did you go to?" and they say a religious one, I know it's bad. And the religious programs tend to be egregious, like where it's bad, like really bad. I'll give you an example. Atlantis Leadership Academy was in Jamaica, actually, and it was shut down last year. And there's reports of kids being waterboarded.
Oh
So,
my goodness.
yeah, and this was, yeah. So
Oh,
we're talking about
wow.
some pretty crazy stuff going on. And there's another program in Jamaica open right now, Youth of Vision Academy. and it's an offshoot of another program that was shut down. But a lot of the staff from ALA, Atlantis Leadership Academy, went over to there, and there's some links, and it is a Seventh-day Adventist connection with that one. And really horrible stuff is going on right there. So we're actively investigating that program right now.
Great. Yeah, there. When you add religion on top of it, we have on my channel, at least, we have a long history of criticism of the wedding of religion and therapy in any sense. I have no patience for it. I have none. It doesn't belong in a therapeutic environment. Period. End of story. Your beliefs are your beliefs, and you can have them. But to believe Jesus is going to lead you to sanity or rational behavior, or Jesus is the modification therapist you need, is just it's apples and oranges. It's just not what that is for. To say the least.
That becomes the reason why they're okay with the abuse, like the staff, right? And many times I've heard people being sexually assaulted while they're being read a Bible verse. Like that
exactly.
is how bad it gets. And the staff members, a lot of times, because they're so like, let's say there is the cognitive dissonance within their behaviors and their morals with any kind of abuse that's going on, they lean on that aspect of this is what God would want. And that helps them make that decision.
Absolutely. There are so many biblical quotes that can be used to rationalize abuse of children. All right, let's spare the rod leaps out at you, and there's a laundry list of them. Just ask Michael Pearl. I mean, there's a whole, there's a whole industry to this. It's not even, it's sort of adjacent, I suppose you could say, to the TTI, because you have Bill Gothard and his, how to raise up children by breaking them the same way you break a horse or a donkey.
A lot of programs came out of him.
Right. Yeah, those are clearly going to be. Well, I'm sorry?
Buster Roloff as well. Yeah.
Just this stuff is just the worst. Every time I go near it, my blood boils. I wish I could be, a bit more calm and measured about this, but throughout here, I'm just reacting because I can't help it. When it gets to children who have no agency or will or ability to critically think their way out of this stuff, at such a young age, and then they're going younger and younger and younger, where, the very concept of critical thinking is a joke, because, when you're 5, 6, 10 years old, that's not what you're about. And that's not even what you're supposed to be about. It's just, you should be able to trust the adults around you. And when they turn it into a horror show, you're set up for the rest of your life to be troubled, you know? Yeah. In a way, it should be called the troubled teen industry, because it turns them into troubled teens.
Oh, exactly. And we were talking about it before we started recording, just like survivors and how messed up they are from these places. And, it's interesting because, I'm sure you have a lot of people that were in cults listening to the podcast. And most of these people, I'm sure, were in cults as adults. But the population, and Yanya said this the first time when she made this connection to me, she said, it's interesting when you look at the trauma responses, troubled teen survivors act a lot, as far as trauma and effects go, as born-ins. Right? Because it has the effect of that on that part of development during those formative years of being a kid up until when you form who you are. It is so critical. And it's like, and then you add on the fact that survivors are many times being abused by therapists and mental health professionals. So then we're traumatized and we go on to the world, and if we need help, we don't trust, because we were abused by therapists. So we don't even trust people that are there to help. So it's just it's so, but we are very similar to born-ins. If you look at the way that we think and how we processed all the trauma, we're very similar to them.
I would not have any problem accepting that. I believe that's absolutely true, and it is entirely consistent with the other TTI survivors I've spoken with, who I, couldn't arrange interviews with. They just weren't up to it.
Yeah,
they tell me their story, but they weren't going to go on a mic.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's hard.
It is
that point of existing within you and then sharing it. And I think there's also that fear of you'll say it and then someone will not validate it, like that a listener or something. It's very hard to see, like on comments or something like that, to completely tear you apart. It's really difficult, and you have to be ready for that.
Yes, you do. And it was a real education for me. You know, it was a real education for me on ADHD and on emotional dysregulation and on specifically rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Mm.
And if you want to talk about some behavior that explains some things with kids, learn about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Not everybody's got ADHD. Not everybody has emotional dysregulation, and therefore not everybody is going to suffer from rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Right.
But if you do, it'll be a revelation to you to learn about it, because it's just night and day in terms of answering why you do certain things and why sometimes things set you off.
Right.
And until you know about that, you're going to assign those to all kinds of other things that are not the problem.
Right.
And if
And
there's
most of
any,
us have like imposter syndrome on top of that, like because we were told we're nothing for so long. So
oh,
we always think that what we have to add isn't enough, or we're not good enough. And not always. I mean, a lot, at least a lot of people, and myself included, we have to battle that internal
yeah,
dialogue.
all the time, right? And then you do become an expert in something, and then you're like constantly struggling. Like, no, I am. I swear I am. I know what I'm talking about.
You have to tell yourself, you're like, no, you actually are. Like, no, 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 I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, all day, every day.
Yeah,
All day, every day. So there's layers to this, I think you're absolutely accurate in comparing so many of these survivors to second gen, born in cult survivors. It's all the same phenomena,
Mhm.
because there's only so many ways to control and abuse people. And what I wanted to sort of say from my perspective on this, having dived into the anatomy and the functioning of coercive control, that's my jam. That's where I come from.
Yeah.
And coercive control is pretty universal, and the specific kind that was demonstrated by Synanon and Primal Scream in the 1960s and 70s. Synanon started a whole wave of things that became these community-based or live-in therapeutic environments that were created by therapists who really, really, really forgot everything they learned in school and everything about their ethical guidelines and boundaries. And they just threw all that out the window and decided to torture and abuse people and call it therapy. That whole thing blew up, and psychology sort of moved on from it in a lot of ways in the 80s and 90s. You don't see so much of that now. It was a huge, huge, huge fad. 60s, 70s, it was everywhere. And yet it survives because the whole thing just chunked down to teenagers.
Mhm.
And they set up this whole network of this. And I'm convinced that the reason it persists is because we have a bunch of people who are not only money motivated for it, because there's $32 billion to be made, and that's not something to just brush off. That's a tremendous amount of money. There are a lot of people getting really rich off this.
Mhm.
And they actually truly believe that this is what kids need. And they somehow have it in their heads that kids and adults are different, which they are, but so different that you can abuse kids and it's okay. You could never do to adults what you're doing to these kids, right? But it's okay because they're kids and they need it. I think this is Nancy Reagan's approach, right? When she's,
Yeah.
what was that, Straight Ink that she was endorsing?
Mhm.
Fuck
Yep.
Nancy Reagan. I cannot stand that woman. So that being said, what do you think about what I just said? You're the expert on this. I'm just throwing out my sort of observations of this. How would you say you talk about what I just said?
I think that, yeah, I mean, I think you're correct. The industry has gone through many evolutions, and
Mm,
I think back then we're talking about, Nancy Reagan, the Reagan administration, like, do you know where your child is on TV? Like, the anti-drug, the war on drugs, DARE, all of these things kind of came in policy-wise, like zero tolerance policies and things like that. And
yeah.
that caused the anti-drug. Every kid is a drug addict. Like most kids that went to Straight Incorporated never had done drugs, right? So they were being labeled as that, and they never received therapy at all, right? So we have that. But then in 2008, we had the financial crisis, right? So we had a lot of programs that just kind of went away, right? The unlicensed programs kind of went away. They had to figure out, oh no, like where do we get our funding? What do we do? And at that point in time, they kind of, like I mentioned earlier, they got smarter. They had to figure out other ways to find income. And so they figured out the pipelines of coming from school districts through special education IEPs, right? And juvenile justice and foster care kids. And how do we get into insurance companies and have them cover it? And now they are transitioning it from like many of those programs you mentioned didn't even have therapists, like zero. Now, how do you make them them as though, as in decision makers, parents, whoever it is, understand that even though there's people with therapy degrees that are therapists on this website, doesn't mean that good therapy is going on. It means that they have adapted and they now have therapists, they have PhD or, masters or whatever it is, but they're just letters, right? And we need to get that across that, yeah, there might have been like 50, 60, 70 years in between, the programs you were mentioning to the ones that are existing now, but not much has changed. Even laws, not much have changed. And so that's really what it comes down to. But I think that it definitely started as a like, hey, this is a great way to make money, but they had to get better at like making it appear on the outside that it's better in order to survive times, right?
Right. No, I say, they're upping their marketing game basically, right? As in a big way. But we have to stress that what the kid is getting isn't any different than what they were getting, 20, 30, 40 years ago, which is just abuse.
Just looks different.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate that. I am curious about what kind of laws, legislation, work being done in the judicial end of things. What are you aware of? I know your organization is obviously, working in that direction or endorsing or pushing for things that would help parents, kids survive this, identify this kind of thing, stop it before it becomes abusive. What kind of solutions are out there or are being proposed?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about policy, there's many states that have passed some laws that are doing a really good job of starting to make the steps to protect the state. Oregon is a pretty good example. Senator Gelser has got quite a few pieces of legislation that have really, really, really helped regulate Oregon and the programs that were in it. And then Montana's another one where I was, I even helped with passing one of them and testified there. But it's so slow. Like that's what people have to understand is that if you're a parent considering one of these places for kids, and let's say it's Montana, and then you hear that a bill passed for regulating programs, do not assume that they're safe. Like you have to understand that when I was talking to all of the Senate in Montana, they were pushing back on letting kids have access to a landline that connected to child abuse services. That's it, just child abuse services. They had an issue with that, right? So just think about, you can't think about it in terms of like they're regulated now because we're really far off from where these places will be anywhere close to safe. Kids die every year here. Mark my word, like every year I have seen deaths. And so it's very important to understand that even when things do pass, you can't trust it. But there are states that are making good progress. Like in California, we're pretty progressive where you can't have a kid over a certain age. I think it's 14, be institutionalized. Like they can't, if they try to leave, they can leave. Like they have way more bodily autonomy. But that's also why you see a lot of these programs in places like Utah because it's 18 there, right? So that's where it's, if you see a program, it's in Utah, don't send your kid there. Just don't do it in general. But yeah, so that is, legislation is one way to go, and it is an important way to go because people built this industry on zero foundation of any policy, any protection, any oversight at all. And now we're retroactively trying to fit it in, right? Now, if any kind of alternative placements for youth is ever going to exist in the future, legislation needs to pass. And legislation needs to make sure that kids can be safe in the care. And what I like to do is think about it in terms of what kind of policy would you want passed if you were going to go to a safe hospital? Like, what would make you feel safe in a hospital? Right. And because it's healthcare, just like they're purporting that this is, right? It's all healthcare. But these places kids leave and call themselves survivors. And if there was a hospital where people left saying, I'm a survivor of Presbyterian, whatever, like they would shut it down. At the rate of survivors coming out of it that they are in this industry. So it's important to really think about it in those terms of, and you know, it's hard to regulate that fast, especially right now. You know, it's really, really hard. And it's hard also without data. And that's another big part of it, is that legislation is based on data and money, but we don't have the data because they're, like I said, it was built on something without any reporting and regulation. So it's kind of chaos. And that's the issue. So each state should, number one, I could say this without fail, every state should have some kind of agency making sure they know what kids are coming in, what programs they're going to, where are they coming from, all of that data, and any kind of abuse allegations. And they should be made public. That is the base of what needs to happen first. Like every state needs reporting data that is available with ease.
Yeah, big time. And that's just the beginning. What would you say to parents of a troubled teen? I'm sure you've said many things. I'm curious, what do you tell people to do, or resources available to them, or what when they are faced with the very valid and very real problem of a teenager in their home who simply doesn't listen to them anymore? Right or wrong, good or bad, faith or not, that's a problem. And people are going to deal with it somehow based on everything you've gone through.
Yep.
And now being on the other side of it and knowing what not to do. Well, what are the positive answers?
So what I'm going to say will perhaps be controversial, but it's what I truly believe. And my belief is that until about age 7, kids are pretty like all the same when it comes to like trying to redirect and lead, and you're kind of a guide, and but you're also helping them stay alive, right? And you're making sure they're safe and things like that. But once they pass into adolescence, they really know how to keep themselves safe. Like you're not following them around, like making sure they don't bump their head or get into a drawer. And your role changes. And that's a very hard thing because every kid will be different at that point. Age 10, it changes. 10 to 12, it'll change. And every kid will be parented or need to be parented in a much different way. So with that said, if you're finding yourself with a quote troubled teen, my first question would be, what about it is making them troubled? Are you scared? Is that why you're labeling them as troubled? Is it something that you don't know what to do, like, and you feel out of answers? And then I would say, first and foremost, our job as a parent at that point in time in adolescence is to be kind of a guide that's backed off, like way backed off. And so I would say, get help for yourself, because it is scary. And it is sometimes a situation where you don't have all the answers. So what do we do when we don't have the answers? Go find someone that does. And that's for you and your spouse, you two, because one of the most harmful things that happens is thinking, oh my gosh, this kid keeps yelling at me, they need to go to therapy. Guess what happens? They think they're bad. They see themselves through those eyes of, my parents think I'm so bad that they just got mad at me and now I have to go to therapy and I'm the one with things that wrong with me. But if you get help and you get guidance, really like a guide yourself to how to potentially shape your parenting to better adapt to each of your kids, and that it'll all be different for each of the kids, then it's doing it behind the scenes. And your kid will notice that all of a sudden you're changing and you're getting along better. And so with that said, my best advice is to get a parent coach. Get someone that you can have on retainer where you can text and be like, okay, they did this again. Now, what do I do again? What do I say again? And have that one-on-one support of trying to help be the best parent for that particular child. Because if you think you're going to go into this parenting thing and never have a teen before and have it and just know what to do, I mean, come on. Like, you're just going to end up parenting like you were parented, most likely. So if you want that to change, you have to get guidance for it, and that's okay. And so that's my first advice, is to take a look at yourself, figure out why it's bothering you. If it's a legitimate fear and there's things that need to change, get guidance for yourself. Yeah.
I think that's a really good answer. And I understand why you say it might be controversial. And I don't think that there is an answer that wouldn't be controversial. There are so many different people out there who have so many different views on parenting that there is no one way, no guide, no 12-step program, etc. And so I really appreciate the fact that your answer is, hey, they're all individuals and you're going to have to deal with what's in front of you, because that's the most nuanced truth about this that there is.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I think you and I both know that, and the audience really needs to understand that most of these kids who are being sent off to these places ain't got anything wrong with them. You highlighted that at the very beginning. They're normal, they're experiencing normal, regular developmental behavior. This isn't rocket science, by the way. I love to lecture people on my show, so I'm going to try not to do that right now. But I gotta say, it's not hard to figure this stuff out. We've never had more information at our fingertips available to us about stages of development, childhood phases, whatever you want to call it. It's there. The literature is there. This is studied material.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend people check that out too. I do think it's a very valid first thing to say and a way to approach. Now, let's say, just to bring this up a notch as we go ahead and move toward wrapping up here, I do want to ask, well, okay, now let's say that you, as a parent, have assessed your situation. You are a well-intentioned person. You do want the best for your kid, and you just can't connect. And they are doing things that might really be problematic. Maybe borderline illegal. Maybe you have considerations about that. I don't know that you shouldn't, maybe there's stuff that's maybe normal behavior, but maybe a step closer to not so normal behavior. You feel validly like, hey, this isn't a me problem. I got a kid here who really is doing things that I don't know what to do with, and I am concerned about their future a month, a week, a year from now. What do you tell people at that point?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that there are circumstances where it is merited to go to a healthcare setting, and that would be if your teen is actively displaying suicidal ideation. They have a plan. They are actively trying to, go down that road. Then I would say that makes sense, where for whatever underlying mental health condition that is going on, that they need support. They might need medication management for a few days. So, short stays like that to get things under control. Maybe you're just highly depressed and you need to figure out the medication and tweak it a bit. So there are situations where I would recommend that. Now, I'm not a mental health professional, so obviously that caveats that, but it's, those are the circumstances where I'm like, let's err on the side of caution. It sounds like a mental health issue. Let's look at, that, right? But those kinds of needs are few and far between, right? And where it's absolute crisis only, and it's for, the duration of the crisis only. So not staying past that crisis stage. And so now, if it's not that, like, let's say it hasn't gone to that level, like they're depressed, but they're not actively like going down that road to where they would need a mental health care facility and, watching and staff like doctors and nurses around, then I would say look at outpatient programs. The kids need to stay in their community and in their familial structure, if it's safe, obviously, but they need to be around their community and their family members. In fact, there are studies that show that close familial ties in adolescence lead to lower levels of depression that last until like late 30s. So it's very beneficial for mental health to have access to your family if they are healthy family members, right? And so I would look at outpatient facilities that they can come home to, and go to unsilence.org so that you can find the red flags for these facilities to make sure even the outpatient ones aren't controlling their communication and things like that, and have abusive measures. But if you need to go to the route of outpatient, then by all means, like, you need to do those kinds of things, but just make sure that you are highly involved in that process and that you do your due diligence and making sure that you look up every single staff member and make sure they're not on the sexual predators list and that kind of stuff. Like, you have to go above and beyond when you are putting your kid in any institution, like any at all, like schools even. So, I mean, you just have to go beyond, because the regulations within the state sometimes aren't to that level yet where they do background checks on everyone that's in that facility. And it is more likely, if you're in any institution, you're going to be exposed to abuse at a higher level than if they were at home under your care. So that is what I would do with that. And first and foremost, talk to your kid. Like, 100% have this be a conversation with them. How are you feeling? What are you thinking that you need? Here are the options. Which one sounds good to you? Because if you put yourself in your kid's shoes, it doesn't matter if you're 15 or you're 40, what kind of person wouldn't want to be a part of that conversation and what they need? It doesn't matter the age. Starting at like 2, they know what they want. So we need to help them advocate for themselves and understand what's out there, but they need to be an active participant and being able to choose what they want. And when it comes to like not going to the school and, dropping out, to be honest, I am a big proponent in natural consequences. And if they don't go to school, it sucks. They're not going to get a degree. And in a couple of years, they're probably going to want that. And when they want that in a couple of years, of course, I'm going to help them get back on track to do it. Our job is to be a safety net, and that's it, and help them learn through their choices. Now, that's a parental preference, right? I'm not saying that's what everyone should do, but that's what I would do in those circumstances. Is as long as it's a safe thing, it may be life-changing, but is it safe? And not getting a degree sucks, but it's safe. Like, they're going to be okay. They're just going to be pissed in a couple of years when they don't have it. And so, like, if you can do it safely, I say let them go through their own stuff. If they get arrested, that sucks. That really sucks. So you're going to have to deal with having that on your record now, but not blaming them and not judging them and that kind of stuff. Like, be someone that they want to tell these things to. I can't tell you how important that is. Be someone your kids can trust, not someone they're scared of.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good rundown on that. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move toward wrapping up here. Let me ask you one more thing, and well, 2 more things. First thing is, what would you say are the top 3? I'm sure you have, and you mentioned on your website, you have, the red flags of what to be aware of and stuff. What would you say would be the top 3 red flags, like things that would leap out at you, that you're looking at a website, you're reading some literature, you're hearing from somebody, some testimonial, oh my God, this place was great. What could you hear or see that immediately would go, not doing this one?
Level systems. Level systems are a huge red flag. And let's see, what other one? I would say any kind of authority over communication. So are they taking the phone away? That's not cool. A kid should always have access to be able to report abuse. And on top of that, we're talking about like outpatient, right? So
in, out,
in, out. Okay.
Yeah, whatever they're looking at.
Anyone that, when you look into the facility, you should feel like the kid is going to be an active participant in their treatment plan, and that the treatment plan will be built and you know exactly how long they will be there, right? So if you're at a short stay, you need to know what exactly they're looking at, and that carrot stick will not move. It has to stay, right? And you know when the kid's going to leave, and you know what the benchmarks are to them leaving and being understanding of that. And yet you have full communication. And if you call and they say, oh, they're too busy, whatever, red flag. You should have access to your child at all times, and they should be able to call you as well. So if something, so.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, because people will fill in, and I wanted you to do that because people will fill in rationalizations
Oh yeah.
or reasons automatically all on their own. Oh, of course it's right. He shouldn't have a phone. He might be calling his drug dealer or
Yeah,
something.
you might.
Yeah, fine, but that also means he can't call you or, the
Right.
cops if he's
Mhm.
being abused, right? So,
Right. And if they
yeah,
don't have access to, let's say it is an issue, like they're in a rehab or something like that, then they better have access to a landline and have your phone number written down,
that's right.
and have a sheet that has all their advocates that they could potentially call. They need to feel control. And on top of, you asked for the red flags, any kind of over adherence or over control on your daily life as well. Do they have free time? Free time is very important in these places. So if,
Yeah.
and I'm talking about short stays because I would never advocate for long stays. So, but, and you're looking at places that do a crisis stay or something like that. Yeah.
Great, great, great. Okay, well, thank you for that. How do people connect with you and your organization?
So we are on pretty much all social platforms. You can find me at Meg Appelgate, and that's Appelgate. My most active ones are Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And then Unsilenced, you can go to unsilenced.org or find us on TikTok and Instagram at unsilenced_now.
Great. Okay, I'll put those links on the screen there and in the show notes so y'all can connect with Meg. I highly recommend you do so if you are at all interested in this topic or area or in assisting or helping in some fashion. There's networks of volunteers and people who are working on this stuff because believe me, right now the government ain't. And I'm sorry, but it's just not. And that's kind of where we're at. It's the same thing as, how the government's going after cults. They're not. It's just kind of how it is. And so we have to have our due diligence and our awareness of this quite high. It's just the kind of the price of it right now, right? If you're going to raise kids, this is part of the package.
Yep.
When you take on that responsibility,
Bad and the ugly. Yeah. It's part of the
that's what it
package.
is,
Yeah.
So I hope those of you who have come to the show here looking for some answers, I hope you found some. I hope that, I didn't rant too much here because this is the effort here is education and information. Meg, I want to thank you for taking the time to help me understand this better and inform my audience about this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right, folks out there, support the show, support the channel, do all the things. I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.